It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the founder of a sports podcast along with Sports Brand, Sports as a Job. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Brandon. I appreciate you having me on, man. It's always different, but it's always refreshing when I get to hop on the other side of a podcast interview.
That's wonderful. Can you talk about how you got started with having Sports Talk podcasts?
Yeah, so Sports as a Job started actually as a blog, a self-blog. I started it in November of 2019 last year. And so my full-time job in the sports industry, I work as the assistant athletic event management and intramural coordinator at the University of Minnesota Crookston, small D2. And for the people watching it, you're seeing I'm repping kind of some of the gears, the maroon and gold colors here. But I really wanted to document my first year of working in sports. One of the people I look up to is Gary Vee, and he really talked about documenting your journey just so you can personally look back at it, but also trying to help others as well who are maybe going down a similar path. So I started doing it as a blog, but then I soon found out I hate writing, and also I suck at writing. Like my grammar is absolutely horrible. And I've always been a fan of podcasts. So I was like, okay, let me start looking into how exactly I can start a podcast. I'm a fan of like Joe Rogan, Guy Raz, um, Lewis Howes, a lot of these interview-based, podcast series and podcast shows. So I was trying to figure out how exactly I could do that, and that led me down the road of starting the Sports as a Job podcast, where I interview all a bunch of different people within the sports industry. It's been an amazing ride. I'm about 70 episodes in. I absolutely love it. It's a passion of mine. I hope to continue to do it for the next 5 to 10 years.
That's wonderful. Is some of the inspirations behind your podcast, like you said Joe Rogan, but what about Pat McAfee?
Pat McAfee, I love Pat McAfee. I think his personality. So the thing I love about Pat McAfee, his personality shines, right? I think with any podcast, the reason why we listen to a certain podcast is because of the host. Their personality really comes out, and that's what I love about Pat McAfee is he isn't afraid to be himself. He isn't afraid to share jokes, to bust his own bust his own jokes, tease himself. His personality just shines. So that's something I take after him is I just want to be as authentic as I can possibly be.
Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to start three of the best sports podcasts?
See, and that's the interesting thing, right? I don't think, for me personally, I never seen it getting that big. Again, this is just a passion of mine. I have a full-time job, daytime job, but it started off. I started to see and notice how much help and how much of an impact I was making with the Sports as Job podcast. And I understand that some people might not gravitate towards my personality or my style of interviewing. So I was like, well, how can I help more people than just the listeners I had, the community I built with just the Sports as Job podcast? And luckily, I've been able to surround myself with some amazing people who write articles for Sports as a Job, and then also they were willing to start podcasts themselves. So as you mentioned, the two other podcasts, The Rookie Contract, Dakota and Kate, they were writers who were doing articles for us weekly, and they approached me with the idea, hey, I want to start this new podcast, and I was fully on board. And then also, I'm lucky enough to have met other people through the podcast. So with the Outnumbered podcast with Kelly and Hollis, those are people who already started the podcast before becoming part of the Sports Job team. But I know I found out about them through Sports Job, through the networking I was doing, and I absolutely love what they're doing. Their mission aligns with Sports Job. So I pitched the idea like, hey, would you be willing to join the family and try to help as many people as possible? So here we are today with 3 podcasts. We're still doing articles weekly, and who knows? Maybe we'll have a bunch. Maybe by next year it'll be 6.
That's wonderful. Can you talk about some of the people that you've interviewed for Sports as Job?
Yeah, so that's the great part of it is I've interviewed a bunch of different people, and It's interesting because when you look at a lot of the other sports industry podcasts, a lot of them narrow down and focus. And maybe it's hurting my listeners, or maybe it's a good thing. But I like the fact that I have a variety of people. So it's not just people who work in college athletics or pro sports or amateur sports. It's not just the people in marketing or creative. It's everybody. Everybody from event management to to interns, to people who work on the agency side, everybody across the board. And some of my favorite were, Derek Peterson. He's one guy right now with Open Doors for all the people in the sports industry. If you have not heard of Open Doors yet, you'll probably hear of them. They're a company that's helping student athletes monetize their name, image, and likeliness. And that's a company that honestly, within the next years or 2 years, they'll dominate that space. They'll be one of the biggest companies in the world. And then another couple that I've been able to interview that off the top of my head, Mike Ritchie. He's the senior associate AD out at, where is it now? Mississippi State University. His journey is absolutely wonderful. He's worked there for over 20 years. That's something I thrive to have one day, is to find a home within the college athletic department and to be able to work there and build a family and just live there for 20 plus years. So I've been fortunate enough to interview a lot of amazing people out there.
That's wonderful. Can you talk about how you found those people?
Of course. And I think with any interview podcast, I like to share the secrets. You always wonder, how can you get these people? And I remember getting my first guest, and I was so excited because, as you know, Brandon, a lot of times you have to reach out to people personally. You're DMing them on Instagram, you're DMing them on Twitter, you're finding their emails. Somehow, some way, you're sending them a message and hoping they reply back. And so I remember a lot of these people, the 70 people I've interviewed so far, that's 70 out of probably several hundreds of messages I send out. And that's the one thing, is that you'll send out a lot of these messages and you won't get a reply back. Sometimes you'll get a no, but there's 70 amazing people that will say yes. And so that's how I got these people on. I've emailed people personally. I've DM'd them. A lot of these people I did not know before talking to them on the podcast. So every time I got a yes, every time somebody agreed to jump on the podcast, I was super happy, super fortunate. So that's the one thing for the people who have a podcast or thinking about starting an interview podcast. You're going to have to shoot out a lot of messages. You're going to get a lot of no's, but you'll get 70 amazing people that say yes, or however many people that say yes. And that's the best thing about it.
That's wonderful. Can you talk about, I know you joined with Outnumbered. Can you talk about the Outnumbered with Kelly?
Yep. So the Outnumbered podcast with Kelly and Hollis, these are two amazing women that's working and navigating the sports industry themselves, but their mission is to help other women navigate the sports industry as well. And that's the cool thing about it, is that these two people who are giving advice and giving this information and sharing their personal experiences, they're on the same ride that many other young women will have to go through. So what they're basically doing is sharing the knowledge that they learn, like about resume, about interviews, about networking, attending virtual events. They're just sharing all these information week to week with all of their audience. And I love that because, again, I think it's relatable. And then Kelly and Hollis are two amazing people. They have two different journeys within the sports industry. And I think that's very valuable for all the young women sport listeners out there, all the people aspiring to work in sports. These two women are definitely great role models for young aspiring sport women to look up to.
Can you talk about what do they cover on a normal base?
Yeah, so like I was mentioning, it varies, right? It varies depending on what they're going through or what they think is important. For example, one episode was about personal branding. So they talked about how you should approach social media, about the things you post, about the things you share on your Instagram feed or your LinkedIn feed, and things like about that. And then one was about finding a mentor, because mentorship within the sports industry or just any industry in general, mentorship is very important. So they talked about how they've got their mentors, some of the mistakes they've made, and then they also tie in their personal experience along with the other things that other people have told them and they have seen from other people.
Can you talk about, I know that you also have the rookie contract. Can you talk about that podcast?
Yeah, that one when Dakota and Kate, the podcast co-hosts, when they approached me with that idea of the rookie contract, I thought it was absolutely wonderful. They've been killing the game of late. They just started. They're on episode 10, I believe. So they're very new. But the rookie contract is basically like the name says, it's about the rookies within the sports industries. So when you think about the rookies within the sports industries, you think about the interns. You think about the people who just started in the sports industry. A lot of the times, these interview based podcasts focus on the people who are higher up, right? We focus on the people with 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years of experience. And yes, the advice they give is great, but it's hard to relate sometimes to what they're talking about. So Dakota and Kate thought of this great idea of let's interview the people who are around our age, who are around the same amount of experiences. Let's learn about the things they go through. So it's entertaining, it's educational, it's a mixture of everything. So I absolutely love that podcast. It's all about the interns and the young sport professionals right now.
Do you know how they came up with that name, the rookie contract?
Uh they were contemplating. I remember we were messaging back and forth. It was kind of like, oh, what could the name be? And they ended up coming up with the rookie contract, which fits perfectly. And even when you look at their logo, I love their logo. They actually it's like a half pen, half sport to kind of show you because every rookie when you sign your contract, that's the big thing. So it's like they sign the contract saying this is my first year working in sport. So I love the idea. I think it's brilliant. I think people love it as well, and it just fits perfectly with everything.
Can you talk about some of the people that the rookie contract has interviewed over the past?
Yeah, so they've done people like Jennifer Fisher, who works for Green Bay. They've done the most recent one was, I believe, Daniel Salazar, who's a former youth and high school assistant um, for the formerly with the Atlanta Falcons. So again, they interview literally everybody across the industry. They've interviewed Jenny, what's her name now? Jenny Fisher, who's a big person for a young sport industry professional. She's already built a very big brand. So they interview everybody. If you're an intern or if you're a young sport professional, they most likely probably have already contacted you to hopefully get you on the podcast.
Can you talk about how the sports job and the rookie contract get people on interviews and special guests?
Yeah, again, I think it's important. I think it's the same thing with networking. You're gonna have to go out your way and start messaging people and DMing people and asking people you come on because again, a lot of these people that we're having on, we didn't know them before we asked them to be a guest. We kind of see that we admire from afar, like what they're doing within the industry, the things they're posting, and we're like, hey, we really acknowledge or really appreciate what you've been doing. We would love you to share your journey on the podcast. And the one thing that we kind of do for both of our podcasts is we kind of personalize our approach. So it's not just the general, hey, I have a podcast. Would you love to come on? It's like, no, hey, Brandon, I noticed that you have your own podcast or your own show called Brandon Sports Talk. Well, we really love your show and we would really love to have you on to talk about it. So those are two different things, right? One is one general message, another is kind of like a personalized, showing that you're super interested in them. And we've seen a lot more success when we use these customizable messages, when we get super more personal, we're able to actually get more people on compared to using just general approach of messaging people.
That's wonderful. What what are some of your future plans for both the sports as a job and the rookie contract, along with the other podcasts you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, for us, in the beginning, we were all about how many listeners, how many followers we can get. But I think we're now, all three of us podcasts, the sports as job brand as a whole. Again, this is just a passion thing for us. We love doing it. We love helping people. So at the end of the day, our mission and what we really want is we want to continue this growth, helping people. We want to continue to see that people out there are listening to the podcast and they're actually applying it, that we're helping people, that we're continuing to get these amazing messages and DMs saying, hey, I appreciate this episode. It really helped me out in my journey. So at the end of the day, our goal is just again to continue to help as many people as possible when it comes to navigating the sports industry.
Can you talk about, as a sports podcast just like me, how are we going to be able to join your team to
Yeah,
better?
you're talking about joining the sports as job
Mm,
team.
Yes.
So the one thing that I learned over the past 6, 7 months is that it's important not to narrow down, but also just not to grow too big too fast. So at one point, Brandon, I was telling you, we had about 5 podcasts and the work that goes into it. And you understand, Brandon, when it comes to editing, recording, marketing your podcast, just one podcast, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of consumption. And sometimes you sacrifice the quality when you have a bunch of these other podcasts that you're trying to do. So we've kind of narrowed it down. We don't want to get too big too fast. We want to keep the circle small, focus on the content that we do have. But I'm always open to bringing on different podcasts to Sports is Job Network. It just depends on, does your show fit with our mission? At the end of the day, does your show fit with our mission, which is helping as many people navigate the sports industry? And if it does, if it fits that, and both sides, we can work something out, whether it's how much time that goes in, how much work that goes in, then I'm always willing to bring other podcasts on. If you bring value to the community and the listeners that we have, to the people within the sports industry, I'm always open to the idea. But as of right now, a lot of the things that we're trying to focus on is just making sure that the content, the podcast, the articles that we have right now, we maximize that opportunity, we maximize that content, and make sure that they go out at the best quality possible.
What advice would you give upcoming sports empires such as yourself?
Uh, just have fun with it. I think just have fun with it. Don't take it too seriously. And then at the end of the day, just remember your mission. I think for me, the past 7 months, as I was trying to grow sports as a job and still growing sports as a job, I got, I don't want to say over my head, but I mentioned it earlier. We grew too fast, too quickly. I mean, we grew too fast. I mean, we really did. We had a bunch of 5 podcasts. We were doing literally one article a day. Our team was almost at like 12, 15 people. We were posting every like hour, it seemed, on social media. We were doing a bunch of different things. And I got lost in the numbers. I got lost in seeing that we were having a high number of listeners, high number of readers. And I started to lose that quality. I started to lose the sense of the mission of helping people navigate the sports industry. So I just started to put out content just to put out content. So I think it's important to remember, especially when it starts to get difficult and you start to see, oh, this is a lot of work. Just remember why you're doing it. Remember that you have a passion for it. Remember that at the end of the day, it's something that you love to do, and don't pressure yourself to move too fast. Again, don't grow. If you can't grow, if you can't handle the growth that you're trying to go after, it's okay to slow down. And I mean, that's my advice for all the people that want to start a podcast or a podcast network.
That's wonderful advice. Where can my listeners find your podcast at on social media, along with all the other podcasts at?
Of course. So you can find us. We're on all social media platforms, everything from LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. It's at Sports as a Job. And then you will find, most likely, if you follow one of those accounts or one of our main accounts, you'll find the links to the other accounts as well. All the other podcasts are on all other social media platforms. And then to listen to the podcast, we're available on all podcast platforms. We have a YouTube channel. I mean, we're everywhere. So just look up Sports as a Job. You'll be able to find us, or even more simple, just look up sportsasjob.com, and then you'll find all the links to everything on there.
Thank you again for your interview, and best of luck in your sports business, sports as a job.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you for having me. I mean, it's, like I said, this is always fun. I love chatting with other podcasters, and to see what you do with your show. I've checked out some of your content, and it's amazing, man. You definitely have a variety, just like myself. You don't limit yourself to one side of sports. You interview everybody and anybody, and I love that.
Thank you. You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again for your interview, and best of luck.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.